What's up, Venkers?
Hello, Venkers.
How is everybody doing?
How are you doing on your off week? Are you still coming down from the high of watching Charles Leclerc say, no, fuck you. I'm going to do what I want, bitch. And Carlos Sainz is like, no,
I see you riding downtown with the place I want, and I'm like, fuck you. Yeah.
Boo, boo, boo. Well, listen, we're going to be talking about that and so much more because we got a friend of the pod back on the pod. We got Nate Saunders, general editor of ESPN F1, on the pod to talk all things F1 this week. Thank you for coming on the pod, Nate.
Hey guys, I've got to say you guys have the strongest intro to pods any pod I listen to, and I love that. That was awesome, and it gets better. It gets better and better and better as well, which is great.
Well, it all started because we couldn't figure out how to do intro music and the legality of that. So it's like we're going to be our own intro music.
We'll just go for it. We'll just do our own thing.
That's right. That's right.
That's often how most good things start. It's like, you know what, we can't actually do this.
Right. It's like when you're a kid and you're like, dun-na, 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 or, you know, you make your own sound effects. That's us. We're just making our own sound effects over here.
We're the guy from Police Academy.
Yeah, exactly. This last race in Monza, lots of fucking drama between the Ferrari boys. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I think Ferrari kind of single-handedly saved the Italian Grand Prix, right, by letting those guys race, which I loved. And it's crazy, right? Like a tiny difference between being heroes and, you know, as Gunther Steiner said, looking like fucking wankers at the end of the thing. If they'd collided, you know, the whole narrative around that thing is different. But I thought it was awesome. And great to see the Monza crowd kind of engaged like that. You know, it was great to be there. And, you know, that noise that you hear on TV it's like double. You know, it's so loud. Probably one of the loudest venues we go to. So yeah, I loved it. And I have to admit, my heart was in my mouth the entire time because I just thought to myself, I can't, the Ferrari fan in me, you know, the young lad that grew up watching Ferrari as a kid, I don't think he's got Ferrari colliding at Monza in him. I don't think I can live through that, you know, and just go about my day normally, you know, after that. So really glad they didn't do it. And,
how are you not already dead inside from all this?
It's close. I'm kind of clinging on, I think, at this point. You know, he's had some low moments that, you know, the young Nate. I mean, I actually went to Monza in 2006 with my dad. It was one of the great moments of my childhood in terms of sports. And Schumacher won. And it's so crazy how far it's come from those days. You know, Schumacher on the top of the podium, Ferrari just killing everyone in their wake. And now it's changed a lot. So to see Sainz up there was mega.
So let's get into that. What is wrong? What has gone on? How did we get here from 2006 Happy Nate to like, I'm so glad they got third and they didn't fuck up third.
They didn't collide in a fight.
How have we gotten to this sad place?
I think ESPN could do a whole 30 for 30 on this, you know, this whole topic, you know, and maybe I should pitch that to them. It sounds like a strong idea.
You should.
I think, to be honest with you, a lot of it goes back to the decisions that were made immediately after Schumacher left. You know, the culture of the team then compared to what it is now, I think you can trace that back to what happened when Jean Todt left, when Ross Brawn left, a whole new, you know, bunch of people came in. And I think that the winning mentality and culture, you hear that a lot, don't you, in NFL, NBA, but culture is so important in a team. And I was talking to an older journalist, actually at the weekend, just about this very topic. And he said, I think it was 2011. A lot of the journalists went over to Maranello for the team's launch. And Ferrari said, this is all in Italian, no English. It's all completely Italian, which makes sense from one point of view because it's an Italian team. But what had made that team so successful had been bringing in people from all over the world, you know, and leaning into the Italian culture a lot, but, you know, bringing in expertise elsewhere.
What specific part of the world?
Well, France and then my part of the world,
yeah, exactly.
Britain, but also, I mean, Germany as well with Schumacher there. Yeah. And they had Rory Byrne, who was South African. So they brought in a lot of guys that came from maybe less. And I just want to preface this by saying my nonna's Italian as well. So if there's anybody with Italian background listening, I'm not just taking a pop at the Italians because, you know, I'm taking a pop at myself as well.
He's a globalist, you guys.
Yeah, exactly,
Globalist.
guys. I just had to preface that. These days you got to make sure people know you're on their side.
Yeah.
But no, I think what Ross Brawn said when he got to Ferrari when he joined, he said, it was massive blame culture there, and it was a very emotional kind of place. It wasn't a place where you could go and have like logical, calm conversations. And so I think that's just changed over time. And I think that what's happened is the wrong people have been promoted. They've promoted from within a lot. They haven't always promoted, brought people in from outside. And I think ultimately that's gone against the very blueprint that Ferrari wrote is what Mercedes used and Red Bull have used to dominate Formula One. And they've gone away from that themselves. So probably I've probably condensed a lot down into a small amount, but that would be my take on it.
Right. So they get rid of Mattia and then they bring in Fred, but is there, and it seems like not much has changed. I know it takes time, but do you think, what needs to happen? Could Christian Horner fix it? Could anybody really fix as a team principal, or is it just you need a fire to burn everything away and then start again?
Yeah, I think, Horner's been approached a couple of times. Right. I think the last year or the last time they approached him, he did seriously consider it. And I think one of the things he realized, he said, there's just so much going against you in that situation. One of the big things now that's actually quite interesting is, the most basic thing is it's hard to lure people from either the UK or from Europe down to Italy. To come and work. You're asking a lot of engineers to kind of uproot their families to come there. So it means that Ferrari has to spend a lot more money to get people over, and that obviously in the cost cap era, especially is very, very difficult.
And I've heard Brexit makes that more difficult, even even harder.
Yeah, way more difficult. So a lot of things that Ferrari really aren't in control of have worked against them. And yeah, I think someone like Horner would be interesting coming in there. He'd know what the Red Bull culture would be, but I think he'd find it frustrating because everything you hear from Ferrari is that there's a lot of top-down management. So, the people at the very top, your presidents of the company are always kind of interfering. And Vasseur actually goes against what I said about promoting from within, but all the managers before that, you had Domenicali, Mattiacci, Arriva Bene, and then Binotto had all been promoted from within and, at different times had been in favor with the president. And then when they left, had kind of fallen out of favor with the president. And it kind of, it feels very political within, and that's always kind of been the big knock on the team, I think.
Is that where it comes from? Is it like a sense of like you almost get the sense that like during the Schumacher era that they were like, yeah, this is great, but like it's not really as good as if everyone here was Italian. You know what I mean? They're like, yeah, we won 5. Yeah, we won 5. I'm like, but it really would have been great if like everyone here was Italian. And we look around, there's all these British French fuckers here, this German fucking kraut winning the races. It'd be great if everyone was Italian. You know what I mean? Like, is that what like the fact that they cleared house in the way that they did after that era is telling.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it comes down to pride, I think, but also you had so many people, so many people who were working underneath that structure were Italian. So it's often the way, isn't it? When managers leave great teams or companies, the people below, you have a lot of people that say, I was actually, the reason that happened. So a lot of the people getting promoted in that vacuum after, I think, were Italians. And I don't think it's wrong for them to have lent into that culture so much, but I think that it probably, in hindsight, it just hurt them in the long run because also it gave people a very standoffish view of Ferrari. A lot of people from the UK and from Europe and other places looked at Ferrari and said, well, if I go there, it's not really a welcoming place if you're not from, Italy itself. If you come in there, you've got to speak fluent Italian. They're not going to speak to me in English type thing. I've heard that was the case a few years ago as well. So not a very welcoming environment. And it just seems to kind of shoot yourself in the foot when you're competing in a world championship and there's more people than just people in Italy or in the UK who can build a fast race car.
And it seems like this, like with Dietrich, you have, who recently passed away, but it seems like from what I've read about him, his ethos was like, here, he wrote the checks, have fun, like left them to do what they did best. His thing was selling energy drinks and making money, and their thing was racing, and he left them alone.
And that's a really good example because if you look at, so Helmut Marko was kind of given carte blanche on, if you see a driver you like, go sign him. And Dietrich Mateschitz would sometimes say, there's a famous story. I think Dietrich wasn't sure that Max Verstappen was the right person, but Helmut was like, he definitely is. So Mateschitz said, okay, we'll trust you. Horner obviously has his 2 cents there as well and can can input that. But Mateschitz did kind of just step back and say, these guys have done their thing. And also, I obviously, when the results are there, it's easy to, if Helmut Marko and Christian Horner were just delivering duds every year, I think we would have seen them shifted out, like in Ferrari. That happens in Ferrari, but the results were there as well that kind of backed up his philosophy there. So it's a good comparison. Maybe a Mateschitz type would be helpful at Ferrari. That's good, kind of good. Yeah, it's a shame. I'm not sure there's any Italian Mateschitz, but we need to find one.
Flavio Briatore.
Who's randomly now allowed back on the grid, I've noticed. Yeah. Even though, despite being banned for life, he's still allowed. I keep seeing him in Formula One, and I'm like, what the hell? Like,
he's still banned, and is he still Fernando's manager?
Yeah. I don't think in name it's one of those weird things where he's like, he definitely is, but he isn't. Like, if you ask him officially, he'd say, no, I'm not. But it's like, but you are though. We all know you are his manager. You always have been. So it's
checks just come to my house and then I cut them.
Yeah,
I cut them for him. Yeah,
I randomly get paid by him, but that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, and then is that problem that you're noticing with Ferrari? It seems like that's exactly what's happening with Alpine.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison. I think one of the problems with Alpine is that theirs has gone to the extreme of the top-down management hasn't even left it alone for a season or two. It's kind of like 6 months, got to change. 6 months, got to change. If you look at the amount of people that have run that team, I mean, you had Budkowski for a bit. You had Laurent Rossi more recently. Obviously, now they've gone towards Famine as the guy in charge. And it just means all those people bring in a new philosophy. And then for a little bit of time, they're in favor. Luca Di Maio is the head of Renault. And I think he changes his mind quite a lot by the sounds of it. You know, he's constantly changing his mind. I mean, the Alpine brand alone being there is an example of that. You know, he brought back Renault and then suddenly was like, we're going to rebrand it. And I don't think that rebrand has really, I still don't really see the point of the rebrand. I don't think it's done them any favor. I don't think it's changed. Maybe you guys think differently, but I think
I'm saving up for an Alpine. I'm saving up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, everyone watches it and it's like, you know what? Damn it! I want to take an Alpine to the streets.
Yeah.
So I think, but no, it's Di Maio is the same. It's almost wanting instant results and not understanding that. Yeah, everyone forgets with Red Bull, it took that team 4 or 5 years to get to the place where they were winning championships. Mercedes had to go through 3 or 4 years to get there. And I think a lot of people who run these companies want instant success. They're like, I want to put someone in and it's instantly there, you know. I mean,
they go by quarter. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Safnauer, they said to him, we're going to give you 100 races. I think he got to about 35 or something. You know, and it's like, you know, even, and look, I don't know whether Safnauer was the right guy for the job, but if you're going to give someone 100 races, you know, you've got to stick to that. You've got to at least give him 50% of the races. At least say you know, there was clearly no sign of it happening halfway
They're doing
through.
like fad diets for 3 days and they're like, I haven't lost any weight. And then they switch. Right. It's like, maybe it's keto that I got to do. You know,
it's like in January when everyone joins the gym, everyone says, it's a new me, new year, new me. Exactly. By January the 10th, you've ordered a pizza, you've got 3 beers and you're like, this is the worst year.
At least Ferrari wants to win. I don't even believe that they want to like put the money in to win. You know what I mean? That like they're just can we get 3rd or 4th? That would be nice. And they can't even do that.
What are you hearing about this Ryan Reynolds, Michael B. Jordan, Rob McElhaney, you know, new investment? Do you have is there any talk around the paddock about like what that, you know, these new investors are going to, you know, do with Alpine? Is it going to change that culture at all? Do you see that as a sign of that, or is it a publicity stunt?
I don't think it's going to change massively. I think when it happened, we were all, obviously everyone's mind went straight to Welcome to Wrexham and thought, hey, this is, we're going to see Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhaney around all the time. Obviously they're a small part of that group. Mm-hmm. And I've asked the question a lot to Alpine. I've said, what does it actually tangibly mean? And, really for them, it's just bolstering the whole operation. Obviously they operate with a cost cap, but you want to be bringing in as much money as you can. So I think what it did more than anything was it was a big morale boost to the team at a point when a lot of the rank and file were just thinking, what on earth is happening with our team at the moment? We're, like you said, Matt, that could barely finish. We're basically in the fight for 3rd, 4th last year, had moved back to 5th. Bringing in that money was kind of I think they could point to it and say, we've got people who are interested in it. I think what will be interesting is I think we're going to see some of the people from that investment group come to maybe Austin or Vegas. And it'll be interesting to hear what their vision actually is for that. Whether they think this is something we're just kind of involved in, and we're here just to see it, or are we actually like we're going to keep investing, and this money should change the team. We haven't heard that from them or from the team yet, so I don't actually know. And I think it's a really good question because it has quite big implications for their future, doesn't it?
Yeah, and now that the dust is settled, I just really got to ask. And Otmar was pretty cryptic. He talked about he kind of made that implication about that Matt Damon said about if I saw that red piece of paper go around in 9 different places, and that's why Ford doesn't win. Like everything's so bureaucratic and all this shit. He sort of made that statement about how to get contracts approved, and I'm like, that was kind of subtext for that's why the Piastri thing got fucked up.
Yeah.
Do we know who's fucked that up? Because he kind of took the fall for that.
Yeah, well, what I will say, I'm not sure exactly because people pointed fingers, but I think Safnauer was the fall guy for that because he wasn't really in the team when the contract, when the contract that Zach Brown was able to maneuver around was signed. I think Otmar, if I'm right in recalling the timeline off the top of my head, Otmar had either been there for a week or he was a week out from joining the team.
Right.
So he, if he was involved in those conversations, it would have been like, oh, he's just joined.
Right.
You wouldn't have had him leading the discussions. You just said, right, he's just come in. Well,
who was leading the discussions?
So I think that's Rossi, and I think that's guys, in those positions because, but this is also where that culture is interesting because if you're constantly changing leadership, I think I'm trying to remember now, there's been so many, people in charge, but I think Budkowski before, when he moved up, he was one of the people that thought we've got to get Piastri in the car very quickly. Yeah. Ocon was then given that long deal by the next guy who came in. Which put them in a really bad position because they said, well, we want to, you had that situation where Alpine was saying, well, we want Ocon, we want Alonso, and we want Piastri. And you had to kind of politely tell them, guys, you've only got 2 seats. I don't know if you've watched Drive to Survive.
Menage a trois?
Exactly. So it's like, guys, you've only got 2 seats. And the Ocon deal, if you actually were to kind of unravel the whole thing with Piastri, it all goes back to that Ocon deal. And you had some people saying, Ocon, we've got to keep Ocon long term. I think you had some people saying, well, let's wait and see, let's see where Ocon is in a year or so. Obviously him then winning that race, it seemed like it was a great call to keep him on. But it basically put them in a situation where they're trying to keep 2 drivers for 1, and they obviously famously lost both of them. Because you had people in the team who, I think Otmar looked at it and said, well, why don't we keep Alonso and, in the seat and, have Piastri waiting for future. You had other people in the team saying, well, that wasn't really the agreement. And crucially, Piastri was there saying, well, no, that's not what I was promised either. I was promised I would be in the seat straight away, and then realized there was some leeway in that contract. And then obviously everything happened as it did. So it's a great example of how to mismanage a contract if you just, if there's just different structures in place all the time.
Right. Yeah. And that's what happens in Hollywood is you sell a pilot and you're like, I'm so excited to be working with you. And then that guy gets replaced and now you have a new guy that you're working with who doesn't really give a shit. It's like, well, I have my own agendas and you never succeed. So
yeah. And everything you discussed for weeks and weeks with that last guy is just now irrelevant.
It's just gone. Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Alonso,
yeah, you both big fans, aren't you?
Well, I'm a big fan and I'm dragging Brian along. So
Nice.
A couple of things with Fernando we're going to get to, but what is this Pravda that happens at Aston Martin every year? It started with the Otmar who was like, Lance Stroll is the most talented driver to ever live. No one's better than Lance Stroll. He's the greatest. He's a future world driver champion. Like they did that and everybody laughed, right? Everybody laughed. And now, and that was when he was with Vettel. And now it's even worse, right? Because he's got Alonso with him. And I guess my question is like Mike Crack came out recently and then said, Mike Crack also like not exactly the guy you want, selling. They're both kind of awkward
He's
guys.
not exactly the best salesman in the world. He said it's a shame that we did not optimize the race for Lance and the decision to remain on dry tires in early stages cost them a chance of scoring points. As a team, we need to do much better job on that side of the garage. He said there's not a marked gap in performance, okay? There's a marked gap in points. And it's important to separate the two, okay? Gotta separate, okay?
When he says otherwise, it's fake news.
That's right. Many people are saying that there's no particular characteristic that is different for him than Fernando, okay? He can just be the same as Fernando, okay? That's what's going on.
And I guess my question is like, is it just like Lawrence Stroll doesn't believe this, right? Well, and nobody believes it. So what is the point? What's the angle here? You can't get away with this at this point, right? And even if you take away Lance's retirements and you replace Lance's retirements with wins, you say, I'm just going to give you 25 points instead of he's still behind.
That's an amazing stat. I didn't know that. That is amazing.
I mean, what are the points here? 47 to 170. So you take away. So he's had 2 retirements. Give him 50. All right. Sorry about those retirements. Here's a win each time. He's still losing.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. First of all, that stat. I think I'm going to start using that more often to compare massively contrasted teams.
Yeah, you can't even say it's reliability. It's crazy. Okay, give him 2 wins then.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's got to the point now, because obviously at the start of the season, and I thought fair play, he came back from that crash. He could have taken time out if he needed to, but probably didn't help him in the long run. But I think that the more into the season we've got, we were waiting for how much of that injury held him back and how much is Alonso just showing him up, and we really haven't seen an improvement. And I think at this point, you're looking at it more and more and more, and you wonder as well if he had been scoring like that, where Aston would be relative to Mercedes in the constructors. At the start of the season, we thought, Aston are going to be, they're going to be the next best team. They probably didn't utilize those races as well as they could have done. Alonso did, but I think Stroll got 4th in Australia, where he kind of did maximize. But other than that, if you looked at it, he's not quite got the same out of it as Fernando. So it's a really strange situation. And I always find it quite a marked comparison. If you look at how Red Bull talk about Perez and how Aston talk about Stroll, obviously the only point of difference there is that one of them is the son of the owner. Perez obviously has no relation to Red Bull. But it shows you how different 2 teams can be about an underperforming teammate.
Well, those are 2 extremes that are both toxic, but I think...
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I think the one with Stroll that I genuinely think as well is that I don't actually think that Mike Crack making those statements and Otmar making those statements, I don't really think it helps Stroll, because the rest of the world can see that there's a big difference between the 2 of them. So it only makes Stroll look worse if they're coming out and saying performance is the same. It just means people say, well, that's ridiculous. It's clearly ridiculous. I think the pressure is clearly there. He puts it on himself. But I just don't know what they do with it, because at some point you think Stroll, if he wants to be a champion, Lawrence Stroll that is, he's surely going to have to put business before family, because you've got to have 2. As Red Bull are lucky this year that no one else is close to them, but they wouldn't have Perez in the car if Mercedes or Aston were close, right? They'd say we're dropping points left, right, and centre here. So if Aston ever get into that situation, I don't think Stroll's the guy you want in car number 2, because I just don't think he can consistently get that out of the car, and all the evidence suggests that. So it is a really weird situation, and I think he's there for life, though. I don't see a situation where he leaves. Which is crazy, because it's a great seat for a lot of...
What's the money breakdown in terms of the ownership of Aston Martin? Because is Lawrence, because I've read conflicting things. Sometimes it's like Lawrence Stroll is in total control over there, but then I think that they get money from the PIF, and aren't there other investors involved in Aston Martin? Because it makes it seems like if Lawrence was in complete control, and maybe who knows, maybe he's a 51% share owner or something like that, so he actually is the decision maker. But there's got to be, if there's other money in there, that I can't imagine the people that are putting that money in there are thrilled about fucking Lance Stroll, and that Lawrence is like, no, he's my number one boy, he's my number one boy, and they're like, well, fuck you, I have millions of dollars invested here, why is this guy fucking up my money?
Yeah, when the Saudis are saying, hey, this is corrupt, like that you're just hooking up your family member, you're in trouble, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So I had to quickly Google it because it's not on the top of my head.
Yeah.
Because sadly, my brain isn't an encyclopedia. I know a lot of colleagues who could have recalled that straight away. So in 2020, it was his consortium claimed 16.7% stake in the company, and then I think that with other groups that are affiliated with him, he then obviously has enough for the controlling stake. And you're right, within that is groups like the Saudi Public Investment Fund. And I think I hadn't actually thought of the Saudi side of it, because I guess they're looking at it and saying, come on guys, like what's the upside to this guy Lance in the car? I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess if yeah. The Saudis suddenly get sentimental all of a sudden just for no reason. Yeah, I think that would be the big kicker. If they're clearly if they're clearly in a position where they're losing championship, either first position, or obviously at the end of the year when they're losing championship positions and the money that comes with it, etc. Yeah. Stroll's costing them that. I think that's when the interesting point comes up of, well, hang on, we could get someone better in the car here. Or if there's other drivers, say Charles Leclerc's available in a few years, and those investors say, well, hang on, we could get that guy in the car. He's obviously got huge upside both on track and off track. I think it might change things quite a lot. But I mean, what Lance is doing is he's giving them more wind tunnel time, at least. So maybe that's the game plan. It's like keep Lance in the car, more wind tunnel time, and then in future we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
There are Lance Stroll defenders out there, and I just really don't get it, because Brian and I should be presidents of the Lance Stroll Club. Like, we'll let you know when it's okay. We're the two Jewish guys in this screaming in this space. So we'll let you know. Like, we should be the one saying Mike Crack's statement. Like, it's our job.
Right.
But we as Jews can't even bring ourselves to defend this guy.
Yeah, it's pretty tricky. And I think the problem with it is as well is that there's been momentary flashes of like, oh, he's done okay here, but they've been so brief, haven't they? It's not like an Albon situation, let's say, where he has a bad season or two bad seasons, but it's like there's clearly talent there that you see week to week. And I do wonder with Stroll how much, if he drove for another team that wasn't owned by his dad now, how much that would help him if he went there, kind of almost like a guy leaving home, and saying, I don't want your money, Dad. I want to strike it on my own. Just go to Williams or whatever. Because for most of his career, his dad has either backed, he hasn't always owned the team, but he's backed him in a big way. So I think that shadow over him, I think ultimately is a lot of pressure. And if you're not performing, it suddenly just looks like you're there on a shoestring with the money, which I think most fans who watch F1 now probably think.
Apparently he's going to be playing professional tennis, right? So was that like, I mean, this was crazy because
who reported that, Nate? Are you ashamed? Are you ashamed
do you know the guy that's reporting that, and it's all of a sudden on the internet on seemingly reputable websites that he's going to be playing tennis, and then I see one TikTok of him serving the tennis ball, and I'm like, I've done the research. He's not playing professional tennis. The kid doesn't have it.
Yeah, right. Well, so that was the middle of the summer break, or I'd just taken some time off, and then suddenly someone messaged me like, Stroll's playing tennis. And I thought they just meant Stroll's play. I was like, yeah, it's summer break, man. He's probably playing tennis. Of course he is. Like, so what? I'm sure he's allowed to. And they said, no, like everyone on Twitter's saying he's going to play tennis. And I was like, and I think it came from, if I'm not mistaken, it was from a journalist called Ben Anderson, who used to be in the paddock quite a lot, used to work for Autosport. I think he, in passing, said, oh, like, if it doesn't work for Lance, I think maybe he can just go off and play tennis, because that's something he used to do back in the day. I think that's where it started, and then a few places picked it up. And obviously, when you write quotes down, I think they then become, they become a lot more matter of fact than sarcastic or jokey or whatever. So I think that's where it came from. But I might be wrong. I think maybe he was suggesting it could have happened, because I've not actually heard the audio clip. I just saw bits and bobs of it when I came back. And yeah, I think fair play to Stroll. He said, well, I'm going to have to work on my backhand, and his wrist injury probably wouldn't have helped him in the long run. That's probably the worst time to transition to tennis, when you've smashed both your wrists up in a training accident.
People don't think they're delusional. The Strolls are delusional enough. And then, So, but who do you think wants it more of the two of them? The father or the son?
I think Lawrence Stroll wants it more. Yeah. Honestly, I do. I think that, and, I'm not to question, I'm sure Lance is very, very committed and motivated, but you do hear things from people that work with him at Williams and people that worked at Force India. A lot of mechanics that worked with him, would often say, like, I'm not sure if the heart's fully there, and how much of it, how much he wants it. That was definitely the case at Williams. Heard that a lot from people that worked with him when he was young. And so I think, I would say, for Lawrence, it's almost, Lawrence is obviously owning a team, but you can almost vicariously live through your son another way as well as you have this guy on the grid. So
it's also interesting that it happened at Williams, because when he was at Williams, it was actually like kind of his most impressive part of his career. He got that pole, he was on podium.
Yeah, because
he was young. He hadn't been like beaten down by the F1 world. Like, he was a promising young talent at a time. And for that to come out,
and his dad wasn't his boss.
Right.
That's right. So that's what I mean about moving away from that environment. I think that would really help him. And also, if you look at 2020, the race where Lewis won the championship, in 2020, Turkey, Stroll got pole there, didn't he? And he led most of the race. It was that race where it rained halfway through. And I think as soon as I think they just misjudged the call. I think maybe, he maybe made a mistake at one point, but you've seen that was a point where there was, Stroll did show a few glimpses of, there's something there maybe, but we just haven't seen it enough. And I think, but we haven't seen it at Aston. That's clear as day. As soon as it's become Aston, as soon as his dad has taken over, it really hasn't been there. So I think that there is something to that.
I think we're onto something here, because I remember I used to go to the pediatrician. My mom used to take me to the pediatrician as a child.
Right.
And she used to just talk in the room as I was getting examined. And then the pediatrician noticed that my blood pressure was crazy high. I had the blood pressure of an obese guy that's about to get a heart attack. And she was like, "Hey, Matthew, why don't you come back by yourself? Wouldn't that be fun if you could do that?" And I walked and then my blood pressure was fine. And it was literally my mother's presence just in the room while I was getting examined was just making me unhealthy, just too much stress. She literally made my blood pressure high just by being in the room. I failed a blood pressure examination. So I think that might be happening a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I've never worked for. I've never worked for my dad, and I can imagine it would have been awful. I get on with my dad really well. We have a great relationship, but as soon as you flip that around, and even to pull it back, even further, Lewis Hamilton fell out with his dad, Anthony Hamilton. That was his manager for years. Mm-hmm. There was a long spell of time where those two didn't talk to each other. And it's actually quite sweet now. You see a lot of quotes from Lewis and Anthony where they say the best thing that ever happened was us having that split, because we stopped being manager and client and we went back to being kind of father and son again. So I think there is some, it is sometimes it's quite sad when you see that family dynamic is kind of mixed up with business, because very rarely works successfully. You don't see many cases of it, do you? Whether in sport or outside of that, where it's good. Obviously Succession's a very extreme example, but I always think of Succession when I'm looking at the Strolls, because it's just, there's a lot of high stakes, and there's a lot of, it's a lot of money involved, but it's ultimately, you think if you took all of that away, I think things would be a lot better. Not to say I don't know what the relationship is like between Lance and Lawrence. It seems to be okay, but I think that Lance's career would be in a better trajectory for sure if that wasn't his situation.
Speaking of fathers in the paddock.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen Jos Verstappen around much this year.
Thank you, Brian. That was exactly.
He wasn't. I didn't see.
He's definitely still there.
I didn't see him in the Netherlands when I didn't see him at Zandvoort. Maybe he was there. I just feel like the last couple of years his presence was very felt.
They cut to PK all day,
and even his mother was there and his grandmother was there. But is Jos? He's still around. He's still looming.
Yeah, he is. He was definitely at Zandvoort. He's often there. He's often sat with Raymond Vermeulen, who is Max's manager. He's often in the. I can't remember a race where I've gone into the Red Bull motorhome and haven't seen Jos. Usually, you notice if he's not there, because you say, "Oh wow, Jos isn't around." So he's a big fixture there. But maybe the TV guys have just said, maybe we focus on other people. Maybe there's been an effort to he stands maybe a bit further back now. I don't know. Right. I haven't. It's funny when you're a journalist on the ground, actually, because you see so little of the TV coverage. Right. So when people say, "Did you see this on TV?" you actually usually you kind of have to catch up with it. So it's always interesting seeing that perspective.
Now I remember seeing him I remember a shot of him, and he was holding. They have a daughter that's quite young.
That's right.
He has a half sister that's quite young, who will probably win several championships or
Yeah. Well, basically, as soon as Max stops winning,
Dude, the first female F1 championship would be another Verstappen. That would break the world would implode. The world would implode if that happened.
You know, right. There'd be so many mixed feelings about that. It would be like, yes, we're happy, but
it's Verstappen. She's a Verstappen.
Them again.
Yeah.
It'd have to be a fucking Verstappen. She's like maybe 5 or 6, so she's only like 10 years away from F1. So.
Yeah.
But that's the funny thing when you see any child of a racing driver or whatever, you immediately think, well, they'll be in the car. Like with Kimi's kids, immediately everyone said, oh, okay, Robin Raikkonen, and I forget his daughter's name, but everyone's like, well, Robin Raikkonen, they were kind of working it out, like he'd make his debut by 2035. And you're like, guys, the kid's 4 years old. I mean,
one year in F2, maybe two, two, no more than that, though.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder if Ferrari will have a seat by then. You're kind of working out, and you're like, maybe getting ahead of yourselves, guys.
I feel like Kimi's too fun. Kimi's too like lighthearted. I feel like you need like a psycho. Like it's like Kimi's too happy. It feels like for those kids that like have.
Yeah, Kimi's playing beer pong with his kids.
yeah,
that's right.
All right, before we move off of okay, so we asked you for Alonso anecdotes before when things were darker. Can we get a picture of Alonso's vibe in the paddock now that he's on top of the world again?
Yeah, I think he's just like the guy that's just really happy to be there now, which wasn't always the case. It's funny when we talk to him after races, you can kind of every session he always has kind of a comment or a quote, and then he'll look up at who asked him the question and kind of give a little kind of wry grin as if to say, like, I know that was kind of either a spicy thing to say or just something where he'll say, I finished. Sometimes you feel like maybe is it aimed at Lance or is it aimed at like a Lewis or something, and he'll look at you and you look back and you think, okay, yeah, there was real thought behind that.
Yeah.
But I think what's funny as well, from speaking to people at Aston, apparently when they first got him to the team, they said, we really want to blow up your presence on TikTok and stuff like that. And he said, oh, no, not interested at all. And then within a few weeks of them trying, and there's that clip, isn't there, where it zooms in on him and he's kind of like, that one, and the picture above his head where he's kind of looking up at it. I think as soon as he saw those, he thought, this is the best thing that's ever happened. Yeah. So apparently now he's always like, what are we doing for socials this week? He's obviously early 40s, but he's like, I want to be a TikTok star. I think. So
narcissism knows no like technology or generation. Oh, that's so amazing. He's an old guy on TikTok. Like,
he's crushing it on TikTok. He's amazing on TikTok. He's like probably the best F1 driver at social media. He's crushing it.
Well, the best thing was, I forget the song they use now, but when there was all the Taylor Swift rumors, they then put a video up, didn't they, a TikTok up with Taylor Swift in the background and him just kind of sitting around to it. So, and I think he enjoyed that. I remember he got asked the question, he was just kind of like, this is ridiculous.
And then he did that pathetic gritty that was amazing. He did
yes,
that.
That's right. Yeah, like a Mike Gesicki style, like pathetic gritty, where it's like, man, you shouldn't do that again. But I don't know if you guys have seen it, but when Fernando used to win, do you remember he did that kind of weird celebration?
Yeah, exactly.
It's obviously been so long since he won. I wonder if like the new era Alonso would do like a gritty or do some kind of TikTok dance. I don't know.
That would be
kind of cool.
I would. Yeah, that would send me, as this kid said.
Yeah, as they say. Yeah.
And so Alpine, real quick before we move completely off of them, I just want to know. Ocon and Gasly, that's getting a little tight. Are we sensing a French Revolution in the air? Do we hear the people singing the songs of angry men? What's going on over there?
No, I think they've got one day more. That's a Les Mis song, isn't it?
Yes.
I was like, it's been a while since I've watched Les Mis, so I was like, I was like, this is either going to be great or I'm going to bomb completely. Yeah. No, I think things are okay for now. I think those two guys, as much as they played nicey nice, when they joined, there's clearly some underlying stuff from their childhood there. But there was that whole thing, did you see when they kept going to like tennis games together and football games together, and people were making a point of apparently whenever each of them would put the pictures online, they'd crop the other one out either because of just the framing of it, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. So it's either something that people are reading way too much into, or they're just playing with everyone, or they're just saying, hey, let's just do this and see what people say. I've not had that impression actually. The one thing I think at the moment Alpine's got that is stable and is actually kind of working in the way they want it to is that Gasly Ocon pairing. You know, both of them have got a podium this year, so they've both kind of impressed at one point or another. And I think that they work well within that environment. So, you know, from everything I understand, that's looking pretty good. And I think they're together for at least one more year. But who knows? I mean, again, I think in Formula One, it always changes, doesn't it? When a car gets competitive, two teammates that get on in a very, very good way, suddenly it can flip around because you suddenly realize we're now going for wins and podiums together rather than we might, you know, if we have to work together now to drag this team forward versus this guy in the other car is actually a direct rival for me getting trophies and getting wins.
Speaking of a teammate dynamic, you know, the McLarens have been impressive this year. I mean, they started out looking like they were nowhere. Then all of a sudden they bring these upgrades and they're looking like arguably the second best car on the grid. Oscar Piastri's had a really impressive rookie season. But there have been a few points, as Matt has kind of pointed out on our last pod, and now I've done some research. There have been a little bit of some points, like Lando's had an edge, but then there's times when Oscar has the edge, and then they undercut him, and they kind of fuck him over strategy-wise. Have you found that that's the case? Are you sensing? I know Oscar's a rookie, but like, is this are these seeds of something that could turn into something more in terms of them preferring Lando and giving Lando preferential treatment as their kind of like golden boy, even though Oscar's has this like wildly impressive rookie season?
I don't think so just yet. I think what's probably going on there is you usually kind of stack your best strategy towards the best driver. And right now, Lando is that. You know, he's experience one. Mm-hmm. He's the guy that, you know, has, I think at the moment has a bit more racecraft about him. I think Oscar, you're right, has been amazing. And I'm trying to think, obviously got unlucky at Silverstone, but there have been a few occasions where you think, why have they put him on that and not Lando? You used to see a lot happen with Lewis and Bottas. I remember just as a lazy comparison to use. Lewis would always end up on a strategy that you looked at it and you said, well, they screwed Bottas over there. But you actually spoke to Mercedes. They said, well, if we put Bottas on that strategy, we wouldn't have won the race. Whereas you put Lewis on that, he would win the race. And in McLaren's case, maybe it's, if we put Lando on this, we probably get second, third, fourth right now. Piastri's still learning the ropes. You know, he's still learning about the race management of Formula One, etc. I think you ease him into that. But if that carries on beyond his rookie season, I think that's when you start to see a driver like Piastri say, well, hang on a sec. Like, I'm not the kid now.
You're
so
right.
I'm probably giving McLaren the benefit of the doubt there. Maybe McLaren fans think differently.
Zach Brown, very honorable, trustworthy guy. Wait, so when he tells you something, you know it's legit. Wait a minute though. So Lando's position is very interesting because when they were struggling, they're like, he's out, right? He's gone. Like he's either going to Red Bull or he's going to the new Sauber outfit. He's eyeing the door. He can't wait to leave. But now they're in this interesting place where they're good. But are they good enough? Like they're still a customer team. And now, you know, he's got this little kid that's nipping on his heels that maybe in a year or 2 years, maybe he'll be an issue. Where do you think his head is at now? Because in the beginning, it was really clear. It was like, he is so fucking checked out, but now it's a little more muddled.
It definitely is. And I think you can sense that now. I think the big thing for him is going to be, Zach Brown said they can challenge for the championship by 25 because he said now we've got no excuses. He's changed the technical department around.
Right.
They have the new wind tunnel. They've got all that facility stuff online. So all the excuses previously they had are gone.
Right.
So I think those results for Lando would have been great because I think a lot of the time he's kind of been fielding those questions of like, why did you sign that new deal, Lando? and he said, well, because I believe in the team. And you'd kind of look around like, well, this team, like the one that hasn't done anything for a while.
And you don't need the money, so I don't.
Yeah. and so those results were really big. They weren't vindication for McLaren and for Brown just yet because it needs to be sustained. But I think it was proof that, you know, they are doing things behind the scenes that are right, you know, and that are working.
Of course, yes.
But it's different going from fourth to second. You know, the key now is can they close that gap up to Red Bull? And I think what's really a really key thing for Lando as well that he must be thinking beyond 25 when he has his deal is that McLaren doesn't have, you said they're obviously a customer team right now. They're going to be a customer team in 26. Aston are taking on Honda. Audi are coming in as their own entry. So in 26, McLaren kind of are in this weird situation where they could just kind of be left out of that, because you have all these engines, and obviously it's very, very difficult to win as a customer team, traditionally in Formula One. And right now it's difficult to see where, Zach Brown always says it won't be an issue, but you look at the history of Formula One and it suggests otherwise. So that must be in his mind as well. But I think if McLaren does make huge leaps and strides like next year and into his contract year, I think that will be enough for him to say this team does know what it's doing, and I trust it.
Yeah, and it's funny because Red Bull does, Red Bull is like all these machinations, and I want to get into that, right? Liam Lawson, Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, Checo Perez, like you've got all these guys sort of hovering around one seat, but Helmut Marko just also goes, and Lando's really good too. Like they might just scrap all these human beings and just try to put Lando in the car.
Yeah.
What's your sense of that Game of Thrones over there?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, well, I think first of all, Red Bull definitely want Lando at some point. They tried to get him before he joined F1. I think it was actually the two of them speaking. I think Red Bull had a conversation with Lando that prompted his contract extension with McLaren, the one that everyone kind of said afterwards, like, what the hell is going on? I think there's some calls coming into his agent, and Brown said, right, we're going to stop this now. Extend you to 25. So I think he had it until 24 originally, or this year with the deal he had, and then they extended it on. But I think for Red Bull itself, I think there's basically 3 people going for 2 seats at AlphaTauri. Because I can't see Perez. There's nothing that we've heard that suggests that his seat's under immediate threat, because the big risk is if you put Ricciardo back in the car, is it just the same? Is the issue just that Max is a teammate killer? I think that's the sense they're getting at Red Bull. And Perez, for all, they know, I think with Perez, they know what he can do when his confidence is back. So I think with Ricciardo, you put him in AlphaTauri, you give him another year. They want that team to be a bit stronger next year. I think what we'll see is whatever they're called. I think there's all sorts of different variations of names I've seen that all look equally cringe as each other. Like racing bulls and stuff. I heard that could be one.
Right. The Boss Bulls. We want the Boss Bulls.
Yeah, the Boss Balls, that was it, which is very easy to lampoon as well down the line. So I think, but I mean, I actually think that Tsunoda's the one who, from Red Bull's point of view, is on weaker ground, but he's actually having a pretty good season. So I think he's the one who's complicated it. It's not so much Ricciardo or Lawson. So I think at the start of the season, they probably would have gone that way, Ricciardo, Lawson next year, but Tsunoda's really performing pretty well. So yeah, it's difficult, and I think Ricciardo's camp are pretty confident he'll stay with AlphaTauri next year, or at least get another seat, for next season. Obviously, the broken hand has set him back quite a bit, but I think he would have to do something pretty mega to lose that. Well, not mega, something pretty remarkable to lose that seat. But it'll be interesting because if he keeps missing races, Lawson's basically just bolstering his argument for a seat.
Yeah, no, so if Lawson does a race or two more, I don't know if Daniel's supposed to be back for Singapore, but if Lawson does Singapore and doesn't, it just seems like if Lawson doesn't DeVries it, and just keeps getting 11th, 12th, it was hard because Yuki didn't finish, so we don't know where they would have ended up race pace wise, but
yeah, it
seems like at the end of this, if the season ends, or if Daniel comes back and, Liam Lawson was hanging around. What do you do at the end of the season? You have 3 guys for 2 seats.
Yeah, I think Lawson, the thing as well, if you're Red Bull, if you don't promote Lawson, you're kind of admitting that the driver program's dead at this point, because he's all there is at the moment. I mean, he's not all there is, but he's if you look back at what the Red Bull driver program used to be, it would be, we've got Lawson. He's the guy, he's Red Bull funded. He's a young guy. We trust him. We think he's going to be something. Let's put him in the car. If you put him in the car for a bit and then almost demote him back to the sidelines, it doesn't look great from that point of view. And then Red Bull, I think, have to ask themselves a deeper question of kind of, do we even need this driver program? Like you said, Matt, if they're going after Lando, what is the point of the driver program going forward if they're just going to sign the best drivers that exist now? So I think I'd like to think Lawson has a shot of getting that seat next year.
It seems like Ricciardo's the one standing in the way of that, though, because Ricciardo's like the vet who's come back and is now on the junior team. And it's like, Ricciardo, it's not that Ricciardo's maybe a symptom of it. It's, I don't think that he is the reason that it's happening, but it's like, yeah, it seems like they don't care that much about this driver program because they're like putting a guy like Ricciardo in the team that should be for the Yukis and the Liam Lawsons of the world.
And they've definitely moved away from it because obviously Perez is another example where they got rid of Albon and they brought Perez in. So you have seen the kind of the faith in the driver program has eroded over time. I mean, Yuki's the last guy they promoted from that, who got his debut with Red Bull from the driver program. So I think the mindset has shifted quite a bit. And I think Ricciardo's just a fascinating case, isn't it? Because he obviously realized I've got to kind of almost humble yourself a bit and come back to that seat. And his long-term goal is to get back to Red Bull. So he's almost kind of reverted back to where he was as a 20-year-old in the driver program. Like, I'm seeing AlphaTauri as my stepping stone to Red Bull. It's kind of, it's come 180 almost for him, which is kind of nuts.
Yeah. What's interesting to also think about is if I'm Hugo Boss, right? I'm like, get Liam Lawson back again. Keep him in the seat next year. That'll be great for selling leather jackets for guys in midlife crises and Eurotrash. That'll be awesome for that. Or do you put fucking Daniel Ricciardo in the car?
Yeah.
I feel like that's got it. Doesn't that factor in a little bit? Must.
Hugely, and they're trying to sell the title of the team right now, aren't they? To a Hugo Boss or something. If you say Danny Rick's in the car, I think you can add, you can maybe not add a 0 to the number, but the number goes up, doesn't it?
Right.
If you're selling the title, you're like, hey, you guys have got probably behind Lewis, probably the most marketable driver in Formula One still, at the team. One of the most popular, one of the most recognizable. And Lawson just doesn't have that.
Yeah, I can't imagine Lawson in like Hugo Boss gear.
Yeah, it would look like. What was funny about Lawson was actually about an hour before Ricciardo had his crash, I went into Red Bull. I was just meeting somebody for a coffee quickly, and I was at the motorhome. They have a bar where you can just go up and say, you want a latte or whatever it is.
Okay, I get it. You get paddock access. All right. Just keep it moving.
Ice latte was just to sound even more decadent. That was what I had. And I looked to my right, and there was a guy stood there with his cap on backwards, looking away from me, and I was kind of like, I think that's Liam Lawson. He obviously at this point I follow Formula 2 and Formula 3, and obviously he's gone over to Super Formula, and I knew what he looked like, but I was like, I haven't actually ever spoken to him before. And he was I realized I'd cut in front of him in the line to get this hot drink at Red Bull, and I was like, man, that's crazy. Like, he's the junior. And then an hour later or 2 hours later, he was kind of being called into the team. So from a profile point of view, it's as low as you can get. If you've not been in that Drive to Survive series, you're really coming in kind of cold.
And you got cut off by Nate. He got cut off by Nate Saunders, and now I'm wondering, does Liam Lawson have that dog in him?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. That's my big thought piece for the off week.
Yeah,
Max Verstappen would have punched you in the face. If you cut
exactly.
him off.
He'd have said, "This is my ice latte, Nate."
He would have stepped on your head and said, "That's what happens when you don't leave the space."
I don't know if you saw the Yuki Tsunoda's this kind of James Bond Venice Canal thing that they just did. Did you see this, Matt or Nate? It's on the AlphaTauri. He's on a Venice. He's on a gondola with the AlphaTauri, and he's in like a full tuxedo, and he like is taking a selfie with it, and it's like giving like the James Bond music, and I'm literally like, this is them being like, Hugo Boss, Yuki Tsunoda's an amazing marketing talent for you. Like, keep this kid in the seat.
Do you have any good Yuki interactions? Any Yuki stories you could dazzle us with?
Well, so Yuki, I've spoken to Yuki a handful of times, kind of in a one-on-one situation, but actually, so somebody who's gained a bit of a cult status online is the old admin of the AlphaTauri social media page, a guy called Josh, who lived in Faenza, lived just down the road from Yuki, and actually when Faenza flooded a few months back, the floods that led to Imola being cancelled, he and Yuki went and were there was that picture of Yuki kind of in the streets, kind of that there was him and Josh there, and I remember talking to him, and the stories I've heard from Josh always make out that Yuki is one of the most solid dudes on the grid, just a really good guy. I mean, I love the fact that he's always admitted he hates exercise, and that his biggest kind of Achilles heel was Uber Eats and takeaways. I remember once just asking him, because his trainer, funnily enough, how it turned out is Michael Italiano, who used to be Daniel Ricciardo's trainer.
Oh, I have 1,000 questions for that. Okay, great.
but I remember Italiano kind of came in and was like, right, you know, we got to get you training more. And I think he was asked the question at one of the early races, how is it? And he was just like, oh, it's brutal. I hate it, but it's clearly working for me. You know, it's clearly improving as we go. So I think I can see why he's got the cult status he does, because he's kind of he's like that lovable kind of driver that I think of all the people that you feel like you relate to, I think Yuki's the closest to that, because he's not, you know, from an obviously wealthy background. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes that can distance you from a driver, or at least connecting to somebody. And he's also he has that personality that is hilarious. I'm trying to think of anything specific to answer your question, but I mean, other than him saying some silly stuff at press conferences like everyone else,
right?
Nothing amazing. But Josh's stories have always been great.
Okay, so quickly, so there was some speculation, like, okay, Michael Italiano's Daniel Ricciardo's guy. He gets this job with Yuki, you know, to sort of as a placeholder. Now Daniel's back, is not re-signing Michael Italiano's staying with Yuki, but then some sleuths have found out Daniel Ricciardo unfollowed Michael Italiano.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Do you know anything what happened over there? Do you know anything?
No, to be honest with you, I couldn't spill any beans if, you know, even if there were some. I think it must always be awkward, right? If somebody leaves the paddock, or at least if you're in Michael Italiano's shoes, you're kind of like, well, you know, I'm a racing driver's PT. I'm his trainer. That driver then leaves. I think you're in an awkward situation then of, you know, do you stay? Do you go? So I don't know whether that's caused any animosity behind the scenes. I don't know, but I do know those two guys, if I'm right in saying, they were friends going all the way back to school. Yeah. Daniel and Italiano. So yeah. I don't know whether it must be, it's similar to maybe what we're talking about with the Lance and, his dad's situation. Like it must strain relationships like that if stuff happens. But, I've got no juicy intel, unfortunately.
So, Zhou Guanyu, his future is still uncertain. Any implication or you know, beats on whether he's going to be still in Formula One next year? What's the angle on him?
Yeah, still very much up in the air. I think a lot of it depends honestly on Formula 2. So Theo Pourchard, who is Sauber development driver, is currently leading that, and I think Sauber is kind of waiting to see how that plays out. Joe's an interesting one, isn't he? Because he's kind of, we've seen bits of you know, of real performances from him, but you know, he's not had the opportunity to show that much this season. But last year, Bottas got the majority of those points when they finished. Was it 6th? They finished Alpha last year. So I think with Joe, there's a clear sense of frustration that he's maybe not kicked on in the way that they wanted him to. So I think he's kind of left that door open. I think if the performances had been stronger, I don't think the Pourchard question would be there. And obviously to welcome in the F2 champion would be pretty good for Alpha if they could do that. So.
Are they happy with Bottas? I mean, his performance has been. I think they're separated by 1 point right now in the championship. It's like, and they're paying him $10 million, and they're paying Joe $500K.
Yeah, I think with Bottas, I mean, he's still got the credit in the bank from last year. I think that there has been an understanding with Alpha this year. Their car's taken a huge step back. And in that situation, you probably want a guy as experienced as Bottas, especially as the team's probably for the next couple of years before Audi get there, probably going to go through some kind of weird testing times, excuse the pun, but testing times. And I think having a Bottas in there rather than having two young drivers is a lot more beneficial to the team. So that keeps Bottas in there. And I think the seating question is always Joe, but obviously Joe has the fact that, you know, China is a pretty damn big market, and he's, you know, the only driver China's ever had. So that's also there as well.
Have they been able to break through at all with him?
So it's interesting. One of the guys I travel with is a guy called Frankie Mao, who's basically remarkably the only Chinese journalist in Formula One. And I asked him that, and he said it's a bit like Mexico. You see Joe on a lot of billboards and adverts and stuff like that. So he said if he actually got into a situation like Perez where he was actually winning and getting podiums, it would probably go on to another level. But I think that China and Formula One have always had a bit of a strained relationship. Formula One's really tried to break through there. Hasn't helped that the race hasn't been on for a few years now with COVID. So I'm not sure it's had the impact that maybe people thought it would, and that's probably hurt him long term. If it had been a game changer and suddenly China was like, Guan Yu Zhou is our new hero, I think we wouldn't be.
They don't have Drive to Survive in China. I don't understand.
Yeah, I'd love to see that version of it. It's just 10 episodes just on Zhou.
Joe going to Chanel, Joe going to Prada, Joe going to exactly. That'd be awesome.
Winning every race, by 20 seconds. It's just well edited.
What's the deal with that Chinese GP? Is that it's supposed to be on the calendar next year, right? But it's still up in the air.
Yeah, so it's still on there, and like with this year, really, I think it's just a case of getting close to it and seeing what the deal is. This year, China was in an awful situation actually, where a lot of regions, as soon as there was one COVID case, they basically would just shut the whole place down.
Right.
So basically, the Chinese government just said there's not really any way we can have this race. But it shows you how important a market it is, because a lot of races, if they'd had that many cancellations, they'd be gone. The F1 would say, there's loads of places trying to get a race. There's Kyle Army. There's talk of a fourth American race. You could easily just get rid of China and say, we finally have we've got another space to play with. The fact they haven't, I think, shows you that China, they're going to keep trying.
They're talking about a fourth American race?
Well, there's always rumblings of it. So I think it's unlikely, but again, I think after Vegas, I'm going to make a prediction for you guys, exclusive to your pod, because I've not made this on ESPN programming, which I'll get into trouble for probably if it happens. Is that as soon as we have Vegas, the talk will be, can we get a race in like New York, like Manhattan, or I think it's very unlikely, but that's the next logical step for F1 is kind of you go Vegas and you think, well, what would be bigger than Vegas? It's kind of Manhattan street race or Brooklyn, Brooklyn. Can you somehow race over the Brooklyn Bridge? I don't know. Like very, very unlikely. And for the last 20 years in England, we've had every year or so, it's like there's talks of a London Grand Prix. And I lived in London for 10 years, long enough to tell you that it's hard enough to get an Uber in London, let alone to organize a professional Grand Prix.
I said, Nate, please not a fourth. Please not a fourth. I don't want to go to a fourth. Three is, I think Miami had dipped at what happens is it seems like they're running a bit of a Ponzi scheme. Like they do Miami and they're like, okay, everyone goes to Miami the first year. And then it's like, am I going to go to Miami a second year? Like the sort of the varnish of it, the allure of it. You're going to go to Miami 5 years in a row? Or do you go there once to say you did it? That kind of might be the vibe. And so once you do Vegas,
right,
it's like, oh shit, everyone's going to do Vegas once. And then you got to have to keep upping the ante. And I was like,
you got to keep it up, baby.
Because I was thinking, I don't want another race in Seattle or wherever the fuck. And then you said New York. And I was like, oh, that would be special.
Yeah. And that's something Bernie wanted for years. He wanted that race where you could have the Manhattan skyline, but it just never came together. But I think what has happened is that Miami, the way they've brought that race together, I think a lot of NFL teams especially have looked at that, and cities with NFL stadiums and stuff, or just big stadiums have looked and said, we could probably do something similar, right? If we use the facility in the same way. So I think that there's definitely, it's opened a lot of people's eyes to that. And I know for a fact that there's a few NFL owners, who apparently have voiced to F1 that they wish they'd got their act together quicker than Miami, because they said we could have done similar. I don't know specifically which ones, but I've been told that that's the case. That Domenicali's been told by a few who have visited, like, we could have done this if we'd just seen where this sport was going with Drive to Survive. So that alone, I think, and the fact that Formula One is so keen to expand in America as much as possible, I think a fourth one is always on the table. But I agree with you, Matt, though. I think there's diminishing returns with this, because after a while you're like, like you said, we've done Miami. And if the racing, it always comes back to the racing, doesn't it? If there's one thing racing in Miami, but if the race itself isn't very good, then ultimately you're just like, okay, well, the race is going to be a bit naff. So I think it is it's hard to know if it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's why I think Austin's safe, because it's like a good track and it's not astronomically expensive.
Yeah, Austin's my favorite on the calendar, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it helps that Austin's such a cool city, but just the vibe of it all is awesome. I think it's probably, it's Monza, Austin, Silverstone, just for, and Zandvoort's pushing up there, and those are all places where the fans are great, but the racing's always, the racing's not amazing at Zandvoort and Monza always, but you can get good racing there, so you have to have everything in like a whole package, don't you, to come together.
So in the run up, what are your expectations for Vegas? You think all the Euro trash is saying that it's going to suck and it's another street race?
Well, everyone in Europe is saying, how dare you have 2 races in America? How dare you have 3, which I just don't understand because, America, last time I checked on the map, it's a pretty big place.
Yeah, exactly.
Europe has a few, so it's a strange one.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so you have a race in Hungary. All right. But Hungary gets 1. No, I mean, I don't have nothing against Hungary. They're very fine people. So yeah, no, Europe has a shitload of races. So my point is, and that's a tiny continent. Yeah, I can't imagine it's going to be as bad as people say, but do you think it's going to be bad?
I've got my reservations about it for sure, because F1's never had a race like this ever, in terms of the scale of it, in terms of what the relationship between the city and the race, like how they're going to. Obviously, Monaco has been doing that for years, where they shut the roads down for a little bit of time. But what happens at Monaco is basically when the race finishes, a few hours later, that main straight and the hill, everything is open to regular traffic again. It's seamless. And the locals just kind of like, yeah, the F1's on, fine. And it's a much smaller population. You're talking about Vegas, one of the most famous cities in the world. There's I think there's a lot of animosity with some of the hotels towards Formula One, because the viewership of the track has become a big thing. A lot of places apparently are being told, if you don't, I think I'm getting this right, either you pay Formula One or you pay Vegas. If your hotel faces the track, which is going to be a lot of hotels, if you turn that down, then for that whole week, you're just going to have a giant billboard in front of your hotel, which obviously is horrible. If you've got non-F1 people coming to stay at the hotel, they want to see downtown Vegas. And those hotels are saying, well, why should we be punished for the fact that the city's hosting a race,
Sorry, we're in your shot, but we.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like it's a weird dynamic, and obviously, but Formula One's gone in there kind of with both of its elbows out, and it's kind of like the kid that kind of shoves his way into the queue. When you're queuing up at the canteen or something, he's like, right, I'm at the front of the queue now.
Or Nate Saunders at the Red Bull.
At the coffee, exactly. Liam Lawson's the poor hotel owner, and I'm Domenicali just coming in and storming in. I think the thing that's going to be really chaotic is that they've obviously made that building, the permanent facility there, and there's going to be so many celebrities. So apparently this is going to be the most well attended race for VIPs, and there's a whole chat, isn't there, about they've basically priced out the average fan, which I think is a fair criticism. And I wonder what that's going to look like on the outside. I don't know whether that's going to look like an event that people enjoy. Obviously, the Super Bowl is an event, if you compare it to another big American event, where you do have that glitz and glamour, but it's become an institution, hasn't it, to watch that, and it's become a day. I think Vegas could just be, especially with the championship done and dusted, it might just be a parade of here's all these celebrities and all these rich people that are at Vegas. And it's very difficult to keep people watching that, I think. So that's going to be interesting. And on the ground, I just think it's going to be chaos, because I don't think they've fully worked out what happens. Does the strip fully reopen again? I think that's their plan, but I don't know if they've worked out the logistics of how they actually do that. So yeah, I think chaos will be the word, to describe the race itself. I mean, from your perspective, do you guys think it's exciting? Or is it kind of one that you're not so thrilled about?
Yeah, we're excited, tentatively excited, and it's just the access is going to be tough.
Right. Yeah. I think being there for the first one will be pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you want to be there. I don't think the actual racing is what you do it for. You go there to see and be seen, and yeah, the whole it's just one of these events that, like, I mean, the Indy 500, for example, right? Like the pageantry leading up to it, like the race, that's what makes the Indy 500 so special, is you have all this pageantry and spectacle around it, and the race is insane. So
yeah,
I think you go there expecting pageantry and spectacle and, to be amazed by this, undertaking. And this massive, I mean, in Miami, you could feel like the wealth and the exclusivity of it. And I'm sure you just crank that to 11.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be wild for that.
Also, watch out for Alex Albon and that Williams getting a podium, I think, in Vegas with that straight line speed, because those straights in Vegas are no joke. They're the longest straights in Formula One. And I think it will be a really interesting. I think, listen, Max dominates every race. So the idea that like, it's going to be boring is like a little bit like, okay, well, the midfield's so tight, and, you know, Williams has the straight line speed. We saw Monza, which can sometimes be a snoozer, is, you know, the temple of speed, like can, you know, them gearing their cars for the Vegas race, I think will actually be pretty interesting.
Now I got a couple of things. We noticed some parents sniping it. Like, let's talk about it. We talked about Jos. We talked about Lawrence. We talked about Lawrence, Jos, Anthony. Are there any other F1 parents that you see floating around that are like, whoa, that's an intense one that we don't necessarily know about? Because we know Carlos's mom. Do you hear about this? Carlos's mom liked to tweet about Carlos having honor and Leclerc not having honor. Nicole Piastri, we love Nicole Piastri. She's an icon on Twitter.
She's always posting kind of like really sweet, like mum stuff about Oscar, right? That's the vibe?
Yeah, with an edge, but we love it.
Yeah, not totally sweet. Kind of like a Sour Patch Kid.
Oh, right, okay. Right. I've not seen it, so I'm.
She likes to drag him a little bit. Likes to keep him humble. You know.
That's good. That's good stuff.
Just because you drive for McLaren doesn't mean you're not still my son. And so I guess my question is, are there any other, like, were there any, and you know, Carlos's dad was pissed. You know, I think he was saying they only let him race when it's Leclerc behind and when Carlos is ahead. You know, are there any like little league dad? Is it like feel like little league dads? There's a lot of dads and parents like. It's not like other sports where parents, you don't even, what is it with these F1 parents? Because the parents are so fucking involved in this sport. It's crazy.
Yeah. And often it is a father-son thing. I think that's probably changing now, obviously, which is a good thing. But I think for so many of them, I mean, if I could probably recognize even some of the newer drivers, what their dads looked like just because they're in the motorhomes with them. I think it's just a case of, you know, obviously the person taking them to the karting race when they're young is going to be their mum and their dad, you know, so they have been there from the beginning. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo's dad, Joe, is always around. Actually less so now, but he was around all the time, and you could just have a chat with him, you know, say hi and stuff like that.
Yeah. The Lakers don't have like their parents also trailing every game.
Yeah.
You know what I
right.
mean? Or Man United or whatever. Insert superstar. It's just, are these guys all just stunted little boys? You know?
I think some of them you could definitely argue that. I mean, but also they've been doing this since they were 5 years old. You know, they don't know.
So,
and I think
have all these other professional athletes, though.
Yeah, true. It's a bizarre one because you hear so many of them who say, I mean, Max is quite refreshing with it. I think actually when he's like, you know, I've been doing this for so long. You know, I'm not sure whether he will walk away. Like if he keeps winning, it's very easy for him to stay. But he's kind of said, like, you know, I've been doing this for a long, long time. Obviously, Jos pushed him in a way that a lot of other dads probably don't push their kids. That's probably putting it in as lightly as possible. But it is, stunted. I think some of them definitely probably come across like that. But it's just a strange dynamic as well when you add into the fact that you know, a lot of them, their dads are their kind of managers or their agents for a long time until they get until they get a proper one. I think that makes it an interesting situation as well because they kind of get. You're right, like the Lakers. I don't know if the Lakers probably give tickets to families, right? But if you're an F1 team, you've got an automatic kind of table or spot for the parents of your drivers. It's like, yeah, they can go over there, and it's kind of like, it's nice, but I don't know if it extends to every other sport.
The parents are not in the locker room. Do you know what I mean? They're like, they get tickets to the games. Yeah. You know, they're not in the exclusive area, but whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of, when you think about it, it is kind of nuts.
Well, and I remember in the NFL, there was I think it was Odell Beckham's dad, wasn't it, who was tweeting, he tweeted a video of Baker Mayfield, like, missing him when he was wide open, like a montage of that. And that was huge news in the NFL because it was like, oh my God. And I think his dad played at a pretty good level at college, I think, or high school maybe.
Yeah.
But in F1 that would seem, I mean, it would still be newsworthy, but they're just around a lot more, and they're kind of part of the picture a bit more in a weird way.
There's like 10 LeVar balls, whereas like in basketball there's only like one LeVar ball.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was trying to think of LeVar Ball's name. Yeah. I couldn't remember it, but yeah, he's a great example.
It might just be the financial. It's like there's kind of like, well, I spent a lot. I like mortgage my house here, so.
Well, yeah. So
yeah.
So yeah, that's a big part of it. You know, I mentioned the manager's point, but I think a lot of the time the parents feel like, well, you wouldn't be here if I hadn't kind of, you know, spent all that money on it. So, and I think that the kids in that situation obviously feel a debt of gratitude to the parents as well for that same reason.
Yeah.
And I mean, Sergio Perez's dad just looks happy to be there all the time, which I love.
Yeah.
He's just the happiest man in F1, which is great.
Well, yeah. Well, he's like a politician, so he's just just wave and smile. But I think he's literally a politician. I'm not saying that metaphorically, but
I think you're right. Yeah. Locally.
But like all the parents, it's like, well, you wouldn't be here if I hadn't, fucked your mom. So, I mean, you could extend that forever.
Yeah.
So, at some point you got to let your kid go. Just let him go and live his life. Yeah.
That would be a great scene on Drive to Survive if a parent actually said that, like leans in before the race and just whispers to him, like, this is the only reason. Yeah, this is the only reason you're here.
As I podcast from my parents' bedroom because I'm staying with them. Nate, what'd be hilarious is if you started bringing your parents to the paddock and they're like, oh no, they're with me. They help. I wouldn't be a reporter.
Yeah. These two guys,
they sent me to school. They drove me.
That'd be great. I mean,
I'll pay for a university. So I got my journalism degree because of them. So they, they're fighting with the commenters on your articles. That would be iconic. It's like, well,
yeah, they're tweeting back like, "No, you don't know what you're talking about. My son's a saint. My son's the man. My son's articles are unimpeachable." I might, you know what, Matt? I might just start doing that anyway. I think that sounds like a great idea. I just travel the world with my parents for a year. See how long before we fall out.
You ask Max a question and they go, "Okay, now my mom has a question."
Or he gives me a sassy answer and mom goes, "What's wrong with you, Max? Why would you do that to my boy? He's just trying to do his job."
My son gets more than 5 minutes with Max. Okay. This is crazy. He should get at least an hour. He gets an hour exclusive.
Yeah. Do you know what I had to put up with this kid when he was young? Like I demand more. I demand more.
Speaking of people who can't let things go, this Felipe Massa 2008 kind of lawsuit. Does this thing have? I mean, what's the vibe? What are people saying about it? Does it have teeth? Is he going to be able? Is this just going to be settled in a boardroom somewhere? Like, is Lewis Hamilton bothered by this at all? Like, what's the vibe?
Can I tag on one more question before you answer? Will he be around in Brazil? Will F1 invite him to Brazil to be holding a microphone like he usually does, or is that now gone forever?
Well, I'd love to see that because Felipe and Stefano Domenicali are still very, very close. There's kind of a father-son kind of bond there between the two of them. So
because they were both at Ferrari at the same time.
Yeah, and obviously Domenicali was there when he had his accident, and was just a huge part of his career. So I think we'll see Felipe in the paddock again, which will be great for a whole number of reasons. But the thing, so with Lewis, he was asked about it in Monza, and he said, and I have to admit, I laughed at it when I heard it. He said, "I can't remember 2008." That was his answer to it. He just said, "I can't remember what happened." It's like, well, I mean, we can rekindle your memory, Lewis, if we need to. So I think he's just a bit baffled by the whole thing. But it's really strange, isn't it? Because I don't think there's any chance of the championship result being changed, because you either disqualify Fernando Alonso from the race and move everyone up, and then Lewis won the championship by a few more points anyway. Because obviously the result of the race is such that Lewis, I think, finished third. Felipe finished down the order, fifth or sixth. And obviously there's a good argument he could have won that race, but it's all hypotheticals. If he'd won that race, McLaren's strategy at the next race could have been different, whatever. So I don't see the championship changing, and it's been reported as that, and it's not. They're actually going for compensation over the championship kind of result being different. But I think Massa's point is, if he'd been champion, he obviously could have commanded more money from events, speaking events. He would have been able to market himself as, I won the championship. If you look at Rosberg, obviously won the single championship. He carries that with him his whole life. So I think there's an argument there from him of lost earnings, but it's a weird one because a lot of it's based on things that Bernie Ecclestone now says, and Bernie's become quite unreliable when he talks about stuff. It's also the person he quotes. He says Max Mosley said that they, I forget the exact quote now, but he said Bernie says that Max Mosley said, so you're already getting into like second and third, like he said, she said, that they knew about it at the time and didn't do anything about it. Problem with that is Max Mosley died a few years ago, so he's no longer in the picture, can't testify. Bernie, I don't think is a really reliable witness. It's like, why has that just come out now? I think some of it's kind of Bernie trying to stay relevant. And also it's one of those things that's very strange that I think Felipe's got every right to be upset with how that race went down in Singapore, because he probably should have won the race, but we'll never know what would have happened, had it either not gone down that way, or if they'd known immediately, because like I said, if they disqualify Fernando, if they disqualify Renault. So I've always thought that's really strange, right? You look at that race and it says Fernando Alonso won the race. It's like, well, literally, like, the rest of the team got banned for life, basically, for doing that, and yet Fernando keeps the win, which is strange. It'd be like Lance Armstrong keeping his Tour de France wins after everything came out. Like, he obviously had those stripped from him, but that's a good comparison, because no one won those Tour de France's, did they? He was just stripped of them. But the guy who was in second stayed in second. They didn't promote everybody up one.
Well, he was probably juicing too, but yeah.
But that's it. I think in that case it's too difficult to work out who was and who wasn't. But yeah, the Massa thing is kind of sad. It's kind of a shame, and I think he's kind of been easily led by people that are advising him. But I mean, also, if he does win that, whether it's for compensation or he actually, let's say in some world he managed to overturn it. If you're Mercedes, you suddenly turn around and you say, well, we've got an even stronger case against the FIA in 2021, because they've already admitted that was a mistake and everyone saw that was a mistake. So do we just get to this point where everybody starts saying, well, this happened this year, this was wrong, I want the championship back, which would be awful. It would be, I mean, Twitter's bad enough as it is, without that.
Nate, championships, wins, they're just things that you read about on Wikipedia. They don't actually matter. So.
Yeah, right. No one cares.
What is his deal? What is going on? Like, what?
Oh.
Yeah, let's end on this. I think are the cracks starting to show in the Toto Wolff facade? Because that is a wild statement. Everything, he releases, he literally self-flagellates himself with that letter. You'd think that a factory burned down and everyone was trapped inside, like hysteria. And then it's like, oh wait, we don't even care about, that's just a record in a Wikipedia. It's what if winning 10 in a row doesn't matter, then what does matter? What's going on with this guy?
It's hard not to see it as sour grapes, isn't it? And, just losing in the worst way. I think that's the problem with Mercedes. Like, you've dominated for 8 years, whatever it was, and you're suddenly turning around after a year and a half of Red Bull doing it, and you're kind of just taking a dump all over their achievements, which I don't know whether Red Bull did the same. People always go and say, well, Christian Horner said this, etc., blah, 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 whatever. But you have the chance to be the bigger person if that is the case, and they're just not doing a good job of it. Toto especially not doing a good job of it. And the thing that's funny about it is as well, like, Lewis broke all kinds of records, some that were very, very relevant, like 7 championships. Some it was like, he moved past Senna to be the 3rd all time. And it's like, that's cool. But it's, if you really get into the weeds of it, you say, well, there was more races now. It's easier to get a lot of wins under your belt. But no one said that at the time. They said, how amazing is it that Lewis has gone past Senna's record, and then Vettel's record. Overtook Vettel, and then obviously overtook Schumacher. So very strange. And also, Wikipedia is also the 4th most read website in the world, I think. So it's like Toto Wolff obviously doesn't read it, but a lot of people do, and he said no one reads that anyway. I thought that was kind of funny. But he does. He seems like a guy who's kind of on the ropes, doesn't he? A little bit kind of flustered by that, and I think also trying to make the story about himself, right? Because everyone was talking about, rather than the record coming out of that, everyone was saying, did you see what Toto Wolff said about the record? So it's kind of maybe a smart way of flipping it around and getting some attention
If he
back
does
your way.
win ever again, everyone will say, well, that's not why he does it, right? These are just.
It's just for Wikipedia, yeah.
Yeah. So he does it, because he enjoys the process. I mean, that's not what you want to hear your team principal say. You do it because you want to win.
Yeah, and the backlash has been as you'd expect, right? I've seen on Twitter people just saying, like, even people that maybe are fans of Toto Wolff and Mercedes are a bit like, it's hard to defend that one. Because it just, I think if Ferrari had said it, or if Aston had said, it's only for Wikipedia, you'd be like, no, okay, that's sweet. Like, maybe you do think that. But with Wolff saying it, you just think, dude, your team rewrote Wikipedia for the last 7-8 years.
Right. No, I just feel like Christian, if the shoe was on the other foot, Christian would be like, we've seen what Christian does. He's like, it's this DOS system. I got to protest it. That rear wing's looking weird. You know what I mean? Like he would just fight he would just be fighting tooth and nail. He's the little terrier that's just nipping at his heels all the time, annoying.
It's a full kind of heel turn from Toto, isn't it? To use the WWE kind of, he's like, he had a bit of I don't know who's the face and who's the heel out of the two of them. I think they both kind of got heelish tendencies, but Wolff's definitely moving further and further down that road since they stopped winning.
That's how we like to end every podcast. Toto Wolff is overrated. And yeah.
I said heel, but I mean overrated. We can put that in as well. Overrated heel.
Nate agrees with me. You heard it here.
That's right. On Planet F1 tomorrow, Nate Saunders says that he is overrated.
Yeah, right.
So where can the people, Nate? Can the people find you?
So I write on ESPN.com/Formula One, and I'm on the ESPN F1 Unlapped podcast as well. It's me, Katie George, and Lawrence Edmondson. We put out a weekly show. Slightly less swearing than on your show, which and it's not a criticism. I like that. I like the intro with Vankers. We don't do that. But we have some good chat. So yeah, you can find me in those two places.
Yeah, Jenny, just cut the part about the podcast. That would be great. Awesome. Continue.
And we start each episode with "What's up, Vankers," and we end each with the "Goodbye, Vankers." So could you honor us with a "Goodbye, Vankers"?
Absolutely. Goodbye, Vankers. How was that?
Yes. Goodbye, Vankers.
Goodbye, Vankers.
A bit of an English twang.
Yes, perfect.